The first thing that made no sense was the size of the enemy. On the morning of October 25, 1944, the small ships of Taffy 3 were east of Samar, guarding escort carriers not built for a surface battle. Their job was air support, anti-submarine patrol, and protection for the invasion of Leyte. Then the horizon began filling with shapes that did not belong there. Japanese battleships and cruisers were coming through the haze, and shell splashes rose around the carriers like towers of water. One of the smallest American warships in the screen was USS Samuel B. a destroyer escort with light armor, limited speed, and a crew never meant to fight a battleship force. Before the morning ended, that ship would turn toward guns far larger than her own, because the carriers behind her had nowhere else to go. Samuel B. was not a famous battleship, and that is what makes the story difficult to forget. She was an escort vessel, designed to guard convoys and hunt submarines, not to duel with heavy cruisers. Her men knew the difference. They could look at their own 5-inch guns and understand what they were made for. They could also look at the enemy salvos landing closer and understand what they were facing. The carriers behind them were thin-skinned ships, loaded with aircraft and aviation fuel. If the Japanese force reached them cleanly, the morning might become a slaughter. If this kind of careful wartime story earns your trust, staying with the channel helps these forgotten moments reach the people who still care about them. But off Samar, memory did not matter yet. The men had time only to decide whether a small ship should run, hide in smoke, or attack. The larger battle had already gone wrong in ways no sailor on Roberts could fix. American planners believed the Japanese surface threat had been broken or drawn away. Leyte Gulf was supposed to be protected by powerful fleets, fast battleships, and carrier aircraft. But Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force had survived the night and appeared where it was not expected. His ships included Yamato, a battleship whose guns could throw shells across distances that made Roberts feel almost like a target boat. Taffy 3's escort carriers began turning away, launching aircraft with whatever weapons they still had. Some planes went up with depth charges or machine gun ammunition because there was no time to choose anything better. The destroyers and destroyer escorts moved to make smoke. Smoke could hide the carriers for a little while. It could not stop steel shells already falling around them. Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland commanded Samuel B. He was not commanding a legend that morning. He was commanding a working ship full of young men who had cleaned guns, stood watches, and learned the routines that make a vessel feel ordinary. The battle stripped that ordinariness away fast. Reports came in unevenly. Bearings changed. The enemy force was not a rumor anymore. It was visible. The little escort ships began moving like men stepping into a road to stop trucks. Roberts laid smoke first, doing the job she was built to do, but smoke alone could not buy enough time. The carriers were too slow to outrun the danger. Their planes could sting, confuse, and delay, but surface ships were closing the distance. There are moments in battle when courage does not look like a speech. It looks like a course change. Roberts turned toward the enemy because distance was no longer protection. The ship was small enough that the order itself seemed almost unreasonable. To fire torpedoes effectively, she would have to close with ships that could destroy her before she ever reached a useful range. Yet a torpedo run was one of the few ways a destroyer escort could threaten something larger. Guns could harass, smoke could hide, torpedoes could force the enemy to turn. A forced turn could steal minutes. And minutes were exactly what the carriers needed. The decision did not have to promise survival. It only had to promise delay, confusion, and the possibility that the enemy would hesitate. The sea around Samar became a place where scales stopped feeling fair. Japanese shells landed in patterns that showed the enemy was correcting its aim. Water erupted beside the American ships, then behind them, then closer. The small carriers made smoke and turned under pressure. Pilots climbed into the air as fast as they could, sometimes circling back with empty guns just to distract the Japanese gunners. Destroyer USS Johnston had already charged into the fight. Hull and Heermann also moved against impossible odds. Roberts followed the same terrible logic. If every small ship looked dangerous, perhaps the Japanese would see more threat than was really there. In smoke, rain squalls, aircraft attacks, and torpedo warnings, a weaker force could appear larger than it was. Roberts pushed into the attack. Her crew knew the sound of their own ship at speed, but now every vibration carried a different meaning. Men at gun mounts watched targets emerge through haze and smoke. Men below decks listened for hits they could not see. Damage control parties waited for a break in the hull, a fire in the wrong compartment, or a blast that turned a passageway into darkness. On deck, the ship's guns opened. The 5-inch mounts were not battleship weapons, but they were worked with discipline and urgency. The enemy had size, armor, and heavy guns. Roberts had speed, smoke, torpedoes, and men who understood that a small hit could still force a large ship to react. The torpedo attack was the heart of the gamble. Roberts moved in close enough to launch, using smoke and confusion as cover. Her torpedoes entered the water toward a Japanese cruiser, and whether they struck exactly as later memory held or forced defensive movement, the effect belonged to the same battlefield truth. A small vessel had become a problem the enemy could not ignore. That mattered. Every turn, every evasive maneuver, every moment spent answering a destroyer escort reduced pressure on the carriers. Roberts was not winning a duel in the clean sense. She was spending herself to disrupt a pursuit. In a battle measured by tonnage, that made no sense. In a battle measured by time, it made all the sense in the world. After the torpedo run, Roberts did not vanish into safety. She kept fighting. Her gun crews fired as fast as the mounts and ammunition allowed. The ship maneuvered under fire while the battle widened around her. Shell splashes and smoke made distance hard to judge. Aircraft from the escort carriers attacked with whatever they could carry. Some pilots made dry runs, diving without bombs just to make Japanese ships turn their guns or change course. It was a strange resistance, built from fragments. Gunfire here, smoke there. A carrier plane with no proper ordnance making itself look dangerous. A torpedo wake forcing a turn. None of these actions alone should have stopped a battleship force. Together, they made the Japanese commander see danger everywhere. The cost came back to Roberts with terrible speed. Heavy shells began finding the ship. When large caliber rounds hit a destroyer escort, the difference in weight becomes physical truth. Steel buckles. Pipes rupture. Compartments fill with smoke. Men who had been working a weapon seconds earlier are thrown into a world of fire, steam, and broken metal. Roberts was hit and hit again. Power failed in places. Communications broke. Damage control became less about restoring the ship and more about keeping her alive long enough to keep fighting. The men did not need a historian to tell them the odds. They could read them in the angle of the deck, the heat of fires, the sound of machinery losing its rhythm, and the way orders had to be carried by voice when normal systems failed. One of the most remembered positions on Roberts was the after gun mount, where gunners mate third-class Paul H. Carr and his crew kept firing under dreadful conditions. The details of that mount became part of the ship's memory because they captured the whole morning in one place. A small gun, worked past exhaustion. A crew trying to answer warships far beyond its weight class, a weapon pushed until the machinery itself could not bear the strain. Carr was found after the mount was wrecked, still trying to load and fire. That image has survived because it says more than numbers can. It shows what the battle required from men on a ship that should never have been asked to stand in that line. By late morning, Roberts was dying. The ship had done what she could, and the ocean was beginning to take back the space she had occupied. Fires, flooding, and structural damage made survival impossible. Copeland gave the order to abandon ship. For sailors, that order is not a clean ending. It means leaving the steel world that has carried them, while shells and debris are still near. It means helping wounded men toward the water and choosing what can be taken or left. It means discovering that the sea, which looked open from the deck, becomes vast once a man is inside it. Roberts sank after a fight that had lasted far longer than her design should have allowed. The men in the water were not immediately safe. The battle still raged around them. Oil spread across the surface. Wounded sailors clung to debris, rafts, and each other. Some had burns. Some had broken bones. Some were simply exhausted beyond speech. The Philippine Sea cared only whether they could stay afloat long enough. Survivors watched ships burn, heard distant gunfire, and waited in water that made minutes feel longer than hours. For many sailors from Taffy 3, the ordeal after sinking became a second battle. The first was against shells. The second was against thirst, wounds, exposure, and the terrible uncertainty of rescue. While Roberts sank, the wider fight off Samar was producing one of the strangest outcomes of the Pacific War. Taffy 3 had been outgunned, out-armored and surprised. On paper, it should have been crushed quickly. But the small ships attacked with such aggression, and the escort carrier aircraft returned so persistently, that the Japanese force lost the clean picture it needed. Kurita faced smoke, torpedo attacks, aircraft strikes, and confusing reports. The Americans looked more dangerous than they were, partly because they acted as if they had no choice but to be dangerous. In war, perception can become a weapon. Off Samar, a weak screen made itself look like the edge of something stronger. The Japanese force eventually turned away. That fact is still astonishing when placed beside the size of the ships involved. Taffy 3 suffered terribly. Gambier Bay was lost. Johnston, Hull, and Samuel B. Roberts went down. Other ships were damaged. Men were killed, wounded, and left in the water. But the escort carriers were not simply run down and destroyed one by one. The invasion support force survived the morning because small ships and aircraft bought time with everything they had. Roberts did not win the battle by surviving. She helped win the battle by making survival for others possible. That is a harder kind of victory to explain, because it does not look clean from the outside. It looks like smoke, broken steel, and men in the water waiting to be found. Afterward, the story of Samuel B. Roberts became tied to a phrase that sounds almost impossible for a destroyer escort. She was remembered as a ship that fought like a battleship. The phrase works because it is not really about size. It is about conduct. Roberts did not become stronger than Yamato. Her guns did not become larger. Her armor did not thicken. What changed was the measure being used. If the measure was displacement, she was tiny. If the measure was the ability to alter a battle at the necessary moment, she became enormous. That is why the story stays with people. It shows that naval history is not only made by the largest ships on the chart. Sometimes it is made by the smallest ship willing to turn toward the smoke. Copeland later addressed the surviving crew with a blunt understanding of what they had faced. He did not need to decorate the truth. The men knew what had happened. They had gone against overwhelming odds, and many shipmates had not returned. The survivors carried more than pride. They carried the memory of men who had stayed at their stations, helped the wounded, kept firing, and disappeared before rescue came. For a crew, a ship is never only metal. It is the place where duty becomes personal. When Roberts sank, the survivors lost a vessel, but also the shared world in which those last hours had happened. The battle off Samar is often told as a miracle, and there is a reason for that. The imbalance was so extreme that ordinary language struggles to hold it. But calling it only a miracle can hide the human work inside it. Smoke had to be made. Torpedoes had to be fired. Guns had to be loaded. Pilots had to return again and again. Damage control parties had to move into smoke and heat. Captains had to decide without complete information. If there was a miracle, it was carried by men doing practical things under pressure that should have broken them. For Frontline Brief, the lesson of Samuel B. Roberts is not that small ships are magic. It is that courage often looks like buying time for someone else. Roberts could not stop the entire Japanese fleet by herself. She could not turn her armor into something it was not. She could not make the carriers faster. What she could do was interfere, threaten, confuse, and refuse to let the enemy pass without paying attention. In those minutes, that was enough to change the shape of the battle. If you have a thought on which forgotten WWII ship or crew deserves this kind of careful retelling next, leave it below. Some stories survive because records preserve them. Others survive because people keep asking why they still matter. When viewers see the old photographs from Samar, the ships can look distant and quiet. The smoke has no sound. The shell splashes no longer shake the air. The men are reduced to names, ranks, citations, and black and white images. But the morning itself was immediate, loud, and filled with decisions made faster than memory can comfortably hold. A small destroyer escort turned toward a force it was not built to fight. She did it because the carriers behind her needed time, and time was the only thing left to give. That is why Samuel B. Roberts is remembered. Not because she was the largest ship at Samar, but because when the largest guns appeared on the horizon, she turned toward them anyway. And perhaps that is why the story still feels larger than the ship herself. The men of Roberts did not know how future viewers would describe them. They did not know which reports would survive, which photographs would be studied, or which names would be repeated. They only knew the carriers were behind them and the enemy was ahead. Between those two facts, they made their choice. History later gave that choice a shape. In the moment, it was simply a small ship, a hard turn, and a crew deciding that someone else needed more time.